If you want all of your data in one place, you need the Intuit ERP. I'm Damon John, and I run my growing business on Intuit Enterprise Suite. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Bistro Cat Food. Hey guys, today I'm interviewing my cat about his perfect bistro food. Percy, you seem to be a big Perfect Bistro fan. Care to comment? Totally. What do you like about it? You love the high-quality ingredients? And the delicious flavors, of course. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Listen to Percy, guys. Visit perfectbistro.com to try it for your cat.
If you can hear me, take encryption button off and try.
Hello, True Spies listeners. Welcome back to the True Spies Debrief. Here on the Debrief, we catch up with experts, ex-spies and espionage fanatics to explore what fascinates them about this secret world. If you like what you hear, subscribe to SPYSCAPE Plus for more exclusive debriefs at plus.spyscape.com. Beginning with the invasion by Mussolini's army in October 1940, Greece was pulled into the Second World War, and with it came a band of archaeologists, classicists and intellectuals who risked their lives to protect the country's great antiquities. Writer Steven Talty is the author of the new book, The American School of Spies, the archaeologists who fought the Nazis and saved the treasures of ancient Greece. On this week's debrief, he sits down with True Spies producer Morgan Childs to tell the extraordinary tale.
Stephen, this is an amazing story, and I am shocked that I have never heard it before. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came across this?
Sure. My family and I went to Athens about 5 years ago, and we did all the tourist stuff, and I loved it. I just loved the place. I loved the antiquities. And I, being a World War II guy, someone who was always interested in that history, you don't hear much about Greece during the war. So I thought to myself, what happened here? And so I did a little research, and the first thing that popped up was this black and white photo of a curator, or actually a group of them, lowering this enormous statue into the ground, a statue that I recognized from our trip to Greece. And so, of course, that was the Greek curators in 1940 hiding the artifacts from the advancing Nazi army. Something they did with all the most important statues. They hid them in wells, private vaults, private homes, all these caves, everything. They did everything to protect the patrimony. And from there, I just looked at other archaeologists and discovered the Greek Desk, which is a group of Americans, classicists, archaeologists, who went over there and not only fought the Nazis, but helped the Greeks preserve their relics.
Right, so I wonder if you can sort of set the stage for us a little bit, because I don't know that all of our listeners remember all the details of what Greece's position was at the beginning of the Second World War. Maybe you could take us back to the 28th of October, 1940.
Sure. Actually, I'd like just to go a little bit before then.
Sure.
So Mussolini had taken Albania the year before, in 1939, and so they now shared a border with Greece. And he was jealous of what Hitler was doing, these lightning attacks, conquering countries weeks at a time. He wanted his own sort of lightning victory. And he looked to Greece. So he began threatening them, demanding they allow Italian troops on their territory, and even attacking one of their ships, killing quite a few sailors. At the time, Greece was ruled by a right-wing dictatorship, a man named Metaxas. And he was actually more sympathetic with Axis policies, Axis views, than he was with the Allies. But the bottom line was he would not accept any violation of the sovereignty of the country. So that day in October, the Italian ambassador arrived early in the morning at his residence, knocked on the door or rang the bell, and Metaxas was woken up from sleep and came to visit with the ambassador. The ambassador handed over a demand for Greece to accept Italian troops in strategic positions, which was code words for an occupation. And he uttered one word, which was no, oxy, in Greece. This is now a famous day in Greece. It's a holiday celebrating this Greek defiance of Mussolini, and with him of Hitler. So Greece was under threat. It's the classic small country dilemma. They had to choose a side. They very much wanted to stay neutral and stay out of the war. They were a poor country, underarmed and underfunded. But this is when Italy declared essentially war on Greece. And the amazing thing is, Mussolini expected to take the country in within 2 weeks. But on the Albanian front, the Greeks really fought like tigers and became an inspiration for people around the world who had seen these blitzkrieg victories in Europe. Finally, someone was standing up to Mussolini and Hitler, and the Greeks really became heroes of the sort of Western world at that time, finally reclaiming their status as protectors of democracy.
Tell me a little bit more. I mean, reclaiming their status, there's so much in the book about this idea of Greece that dates back so many thousands of years. I'm especially curious, you write about how the war sort of created an opportunity for Greeks to rise up and assume this position of greatness that they felt that they had lost. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Native Greeks really felt that they had fallen away from the times of Plato and Sparta and things like that. They had once been the greatest civilization on earth. Now they were a poor, mostly farming country, an afterthought in European politics. And so Greeks really got very down on themselves, just to put it bluntly. They thought of the ancients almost as giants. They really thought they were physically larger than modern Greeks, which was just a metaphor for a feeling of inferiority to their ancestors. So Metaxas, after the war began, gave a great speech. And he said that this is our chance. We're not going to win the war, but we're going to show our valor and our courage, and we're going to finally measure up to the example of our ancestors. And that is something that really struck a deep chord with the Greeks. They had this inferiority complex, and this was a chance to get rid of it. And so they really fought brilliantly in Albania. And what a lot of people don't realize, during World War II, Greece was one of the highest mortality rates of the war, even larger than places like Poland. They lost a great many people to death and starvation, executions, things like that. So they had a very violent, bitter war in which they resisted constantly. So I do think they came out of the war with a great deal of more respect for themselves, and they should have, because they were the first really to put up a fight against the fascists and carried it out throughout the whole war.
And of course, we should also talk about the relationship of the Nazi Party to ancient Greece. I mean, I know there was this idea held by the Nazis that Greece had been built by Aryans, and Nazis, of course, used this prestige of this revisionist history kind of to their advantage.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's a question of whether Hitler truly believed that the ancient Greeks were kind of proto-Germans, people who had come down from the north, settled in Greece, and created this one-of-a-kind civilization, or whether it was sort of just cover for his dictatorship. I really believe the former. This is an art student who fell in love with Greek sculpture, really adored the creators of that period, went after some of their sculptures that he wanted to own personally. He wanted to see them every day. So I do think he authentically believed that the Germans had founded ancient Greece. The terrible thing for him was that when he looked for evidence in German excavations, he ordered archaeologists to go find a connection between the Aryans and ancient Greece. When they were digging in Germany, they kept coming up with like these wooden beer mugs, and that was like the extent of the riches they were pulling from the soil. So it was an embarrassment for Hitler to believe that, his ancestors had done nothing more than create sort of drinking vessels. And so he became obsessed with not only taking Greece, but he became obsessed with the idea of kind of returning home. This was our first civilization. we have to go back and occupy the country. And, in a way, the Aryan soul will be complete in that way. We're going to finally take back our civilization. So, yeah, this was a huge obsession with him and many of his lieutenants. They really wanted to find this link between ancient Germany and ancient Greece.
So at the center of this story is a man called Rodney Young. He kind of cuts a F. Scott Fitzgerald character in this book. And tell me a little bit about who he was and how he found himself in Greece at this very pivotal moment.
Sure. He had grown up a son of privilege. His family had founded a very important beer dynasty in America generations before. He was rich. He didn't need to do anything. He was kind of a playboy in Manhattan before the war. But a complex guy. He was had very dark moods, kind of like Hemingway, who he really tried to emulate at certain points. So he fell in love with Greek architecture. Greece was seen at the time as sort of a bulwark against the vulgar American taste. This was the original Western classicism. And so a lot of elites went into archaeology sort of as not as a caste symbol, but as just like a pursuit of beauty and truth. So he went to school for it. He went over to Athens before the war. He dug in the Agora, which is the ancient marketplace, and fell in love with the people, fell in love with just the richness of the discoveries that was possible there. And so he was there when the Italian planes came soon after Mussolini's ultimatum. He watched them dive on the royal palace, and he felt this instinct that I want to help. He really saw America as an inheritor of ancient Greece. We were the powerful nation built on democratic ideals that had to sort of rescue our ancestors, at least our intellectual ancestors. So, he tried to join the Greek army. It was illegal at the time. And then he, of course, hired an ambulance, or actually bought an ambulance, fitted it out, some of it with family money, and he went to the Albanian front, and that's where he saw the first action of the war.
It's interesting you mentioned this about, America holding Greece in some high, in great esteem. And it seemed to go both ways. I mean, you write in the book that, I'm going to quote to you, America held a special place in the Athenian heart. It was the new Greece across the sea.
Yes. It's hard to sort of get an understanding of Greece at the time. It was a very rural country. There was not a lot of higher education. People were isolated in villages in the mountains. And so they had this very romantic ideal of America, which they heard through sort of rumor and returning immigrants from there. And they saw it as, like I said, a colossus that had grown out of Greek ideas, that the founding fathers, many of whom spoke Greek and were inspired by people like Plato and Socrates, fashioned the country after Greek thought. And while Greece had sort of foundered and grown poor, grown fragile, America was strong. America was the future of sort of Athenian thought. So there was sort of a spiritual connection between the two countries that were recognized both by Americans and by Greeks.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at Accenture.com/Spotify.
This summer, soccer is here, and so are the watch parties. And Uber Eats has your game day essentials covered. Everything you need to keep your crowd happy, delivered straight to your door. Get wings, pizza, chips, dips, fresh ingredients, and more. Keep the soccer going and all your game day essentials flowing. Order in so you can lock in for the games. Only on Uber Eats for a limited time.
So another figure in the book is Wild Bill Donovan, who True Spies listeners know was the head of the OSS. Of course, Donovan himself was not an archaeologist, nor was he a classicist. He was a very different person than the sort of protagonist of this story, Rodney Young. So why was he interested in preserving Greek art and relics? How did he end up in this book?
Well, Donovan was, of course, head of the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA. So he was tasked with sort of creating a spy agency out of thin air. He had wide-ranging interests. Yeah, he was not a classicist or someone who was especially interested in ancient Greece, but what he did trust were sort of the American elite. So when he went for agents and spy masters and operatives, first places he looked were places like Harvard and Yale. He thought that these were bound to be good people. He thought that just by being at Princeton, it was sort of a vetting process. You were an able person, an honorable person. And Rodney Young just traveled in those circles. You know, he was rich. He'd gone to good schools. He knew the people that mixed with Donovan. And so time was short. Donovan had to get a leader for this mission. And Rodney Young's name just kept coming up through acquaintances. So that's really how it was done. It was almost like a social invitation to come lead this mission. And Rodney Young, who had been in despair before hearing from Donovan, he was sitting in a desk job in Washington and writing to his friends that they were better off dead than, not being in the war. So he saw this as a godsend, and he accepted immediately.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me reading this book and knowing that the people at the Greek desk were largely, students and scholars of academic disciplines that are increasingly being shut down and defunded all over the world. And I guess, I know I'm talking to a former English major here, but is there a lesson to be learned here about the values of humanities education? Or maybe a better question is, could there be a Greek desk today?
It's a fascinating question. One of the things that drew me to this story was that all the archaeologists who were involved in this war, the Greeks, the Americans, the British, and even one German who I talk about later in the book, they were kind of brothers under the uniform. They had a vision of the world that was thousands of years old. It was just not confined to the 1940s and to the struggle between certain countries. So they had this sort of idea that the ancient teachings and the ancient arts must survive, even if it went against their own national interests. So you had this German archaeologist, Roland Hempe, and he disobeyed Hitler's orders. Hitler wanted to destroy Greece, destroy Athens at the end of the war, mostly out of vengeance, and ordered the Marathon Dam, which sat just above the city, to be blown so that the waters could come in and destroy the city. And it would have devastated the archaeological sites. It would have done damage to many of the statues. But these guys sort of, joined forces, even though they were on opposite sides, because they had a larger vision provided by their studies of ancient Greece and their studies of ancient Rome. And they just had a veneration for these things. So, I think the knowledge will always be there, but I think what we are losing is the idea that, these ancient traditions can be a real force in the modern world, and that it can be a unifying factor.
Yeah. No, another particular standout at the Greek desk is a Bryn Mawr graduate called Dorothy Cox, and she was only paid as much as a secretary, but she ended up being this extraordinary asset to Young and his team. And what were Cox's skills, and sort of what did she bring to the fold?
Yeah, I think she's really my favorite character in the book. She was an academic. She was a bright young thing in St. Louis during the 1920s and thought she was going to have this fabulous career. Soon went out into the world and found that she couldn't even get a job as a secretary. The discrimination against women was just so intense. So she went into the field as an archaeologist, did some work in Greece, met people like Rodney Young. And in the field, she was actually so good at her job that she was considered an equal. She demanded to be paid the same as the male archaeologists and made a name for herself, mostly in the study of coins. But also she became what they call an archaeological architect. She diagrammed the site. She measured the depth to certain discoveries. She was sort of the the master of the entire site. When the war came, she volunteered like all the others. She had this idea of an obligation to Greece. It had given her so much. But like you said, she was offered a job at a secretary's wage, even though the danger and the task was equal to any man in the field. So she became sort of the point man or the point woman, interrogating and interviewing Greek refugees coming out of the country. She was looking for information. She was looking for double agents to send back in. So she was the point of the spear, and she was absolutely brilliant at it. The British had been in the field, had been in Turkey where she was operating really for decades. And she outperformed them to the point where they stopped cooperating with America because they were being outdone by this young woman. So I think she did use a lot of her empathetic skills to get these stories out. But she was also brilliant in sort of analyzing who was telling the truth and who wasn't. She just had an instinct for it. And never got the recognition, often used her own funds to pay for certain supplies. So really an unsung hero of the war.
Tell us about some of the major operations that this team was up to. I mean, Honeymoon comes to mind as a standout.
Yeah, it's the most sort of Hollywood-ready mission that they performed. So it centered on Agent Cicero, who was a native Greek working in Ankara at the British Embassy. And he was sort of a foot servant to the ambassador. And with that, got access to the man's bedroom, his safe, his office. And what he quickly discovered was that the ambassador was receiving telegrams and cables coming from the highest reaches of Allied command. So he was learning what Churchill had said in a meeting the day before. He was learning what Stalin had planned for their attack on Germany. Absolutely high-level, elite information. He wanted to sell it. He wanted to sort of play a part in the war. And he made contact with the Germans and became one of their agents. The Greek desk comes into this because the Americans and the Allies knew they had a leak in the embassy, but they didn't know who. So there was an American secretary there named Cordelia Capp, and she, just on her own, came to find that Cicero was the agent. And so she sort of revealed him to Allied intelligence. The trick was that in Berlin, Hitler and the others were getting this information, and it was so good and it was so rich that they almost couldn't believe it. They thought that Cicero might be a double agent. Mm-hmm. Cordelia Capp knew he was not a double agent. So she became the object of the search both from German and from the Allied sides. If the Germans got her and interrogated her, they would have realized that Cicero was for real, that the information about D-Day upcoming in about 2 months was accurate, and it was coming at Normandy on this date. So D-Day would have been completely endangered had they gotten this young woman in their clutches. So the Greek desk was tasked with getting her out of Turkey safely. And it was really like a 1940s Hollywood movie. They disguised her, they dyed her hair, they gave her different clothes, and they smuggled her to the train station where she pretended to be the bride of one of the agents. Shuffled her between trains because the Germans were watching the train stations. And in this sort of daring TikTok mission, they managed to smuggle her out of the country. And it's one of the sort of undersung operations of the Greek desk, but it's probably the most important to the Allied mission in the war. Had they gotten a hold of Cap, I think the story of D-Day would have been so different. So yeah, it was a huge coup for the Greek desk. And, one of the things that came from having worked in the country is they knew the language, they knew sort of the customs and the manners, and that really helped them get this woman, out to safety.
What do we know about what these archaeologists were up to after the war, what the epilogue of this story is?
This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino Ciao. A gift from Italy to your home. San Pellegrino Ciao is a flavored sparkling water made with real fruit juice, finished with a pinch of Sicilian salt for a perfectly balanced taste. So which flavor will you choose? Peach, lime, blood orange, cherry, or maybe the all-new limoncello? Crafted in Italy with 0 grams of added sugar. San Pellegrino Ciao. Buy it now.
United connects you to more of the world than any U.S. airline, and United for Business can get your company where you need to go. Whether you're growing a business or managing travel for thousands, they offer solutions to fit your needs. Track expenses, create reports, and manage traveler perks. Plus, employees earn Mileage Plus miles while your company saves on travel. Get started with no minimum spend or flight requirements. Visit business.united.com/podcast.
Sure. I mean, I think first you have to say that many of them were deeply affected by what they saw and what they did. Dorothy Cox almost came apart completely. She had to sort of go to a farm in the Northeast and be alone and be quiet for months at a time. Her hair was falling out. So they all paid a very high price. Rodney Young, I do believe, was drinking heavily because of what he saw. And the other thing is they all returned to their original love. They all went digging and they made actually amazing discoveries. I'll focus on Rodney Young. He went to Turkey and discovered the tomb of the ancient King Midas, or it might have been King Midas's father. That's still in dispute. But this is a famous figure from antiquity, the man with the golden touch. But this was an almost completely unknown civilization that Rodney Young found and excavated and gave back to the world. So even though they were really good at war, honestly, and they were really good at espionage, it's not really what moved them. All of them returned to the thing that this book is about a love of antiquities and the love of the past for its own sake. So it's moving to me that, they didn't become sort of intoxicated by espionage, which is a fascinating world. It was a means to an end to them, to pay back Greece, who had given the world so much. And they just continued to live their lives in pursuit of beauty and truth.
Yeah. No, it's remarkable. And, the book, it doesn't really feel like history. I think it's a cliche to say that you've written it like a novel, but it's really true. And Rodney Young makes such a terrific leading man. I'm curious about your research process and what allowed you to build these evocative scenes and really rich characters.
Yeah, some of the characters were tough, to be honest. Like Rodney Young was a classic member of the silent generation. Never spoke about the war afterwards, very tight-lipped. And a lot of them were not sort of, self-advertisers. They didn't write memoirs. They didn't advertise their heroics during the war. The key resource, of course, was the National Archives down near Baltimore, where the memos and the telegrams of the Greek deaths are all preserved there. So even in these sort of business memos, you get an idea of the personality behind it. Beyond that, I was able to get in touch with Dorothy Cox's family. They gave me sort of a family history about her childhood, which really just showed what an ambitious young woman she was and how she's really been crushed in like job interview after job interview, not being valued. I went to the families. There's a character named Helios Dundalakis. He was an agent inside Greece. I found his two sons in America, and they were happy to tell me all about him. I always do make a sort of point of not looking to make it cinematic necessarily, but to get into the inner lives of these characters because they are so rich. And so in these sort of combination of family histories and family interviews combined with the historical record in the National Archives, I was able to sort of, recreate these scenes in sort of a vivid way. And that was my intention.
This isn't your first book about espionage, but you've also covered a lot of other subject matter, and I know you've written works of fiction as well. I wonder what your books have in common, what sort of stories you see that you're being drawn to.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. I do think that what it comes down to is that I look for exceptional individuals who were able to change history. Not necessarily on their own, but they were kind of the point of the spear or a key cog in turning point moments. So, I wrote a book about the young Dalai Lama escaping Tibet when he was a very young man. And I really tried to draw out the qualities of each of these people who did play a part in in altering the course of history, and why personally they were able to do it. That does fascinate me. So like with Agent Garbo is a previous espionage book I did. This was a Spanish guy who had failed at everything he did in his life. He was a low-level hotel manager when the war started. And he just found these qualities within himself that enabled him to become, I think, one of the top 2 or 3 spies in the war. So, yeah, it's just like this harnessing of inner resources that people didn't even know about within themselves in historical moments that kind of fascinates me. And also the combination of kind of adventure and ideas. I don't want to just write a strict mechanical narrative where just telling what happened. I want to intersect with the great ideas of the age and how these guys were either tools or they were sort of pioneers in advancing one school of thought or another.
Do you know what's next for you?
I don't, actually. I'm looking for the next one. So, maybe your listeners have some ideas, but yeah, I think finding a good idea is the hardest part of what I do, because there's been so many books, there's so many podcasts out there, there's so many internet articles. It's really hard to find something fresh that still has meaning today. So yeah, I'm still on the hunt.
Well, I have one last question for you, and I think it's a big one. I think it's impossible to read this book without thinking about the many works of art that are now at the center of debates about restitution and the looting of cultural heritage. And of course, we now know that the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza and in Iran have damaged countless artifacts and heritage sites in all of those places. I am interested to know whether covering a story like this one sort of changes the way that you follow those events in those other countries in the news today, knowing that the losses that are sustained there aren't only counted in lives and in infrastructure, but also in cultural legacy and rhetoric and national pride.
Sure. Well, I was really moved by the Greeks' connection with their own ancient relics. In the book, I write that they often thought that they were possessed by spirits, that they were actually alive inside, the stone or the marble. And what the Greeks did that I think does apply to the modern world is, in books like The Monuments Men, we find international art experts going in to rescue great works of art in France or in England. The Greeks did it completely differently. They saw the threat coming, and they began to prepare months before the Nazis invaded. And I do think that is instructive. I think that any country under threat has to not only, whatever they're doing, rearm themselves, train the citizenry, build drones or whatever. They have to really understand the importance of their art and their artifacts to their people, to the survival of their people as a nation. That's what the Greeks did. They bled and they starved and they died for these artifacts that meant so much to them. Without these artifacts, they really felt that they would be nobodies, that they wouldn't really exist in the world. There was such a strong connection there. And I do feel that we underestimate that in populations around the world. We think that, considerations of art and protecting antiquities should come last. But for the people and for future generations, it's really a primary objective to understand where they came from and who they are. So I would just advocate for, on the countries in question, being proactive when there is a threat from over your borders, securing your artifacts, and for internationally just to recognize that these are things that are almost as important as water or heat or food, because they sum up a people, and we just have to take them seriously.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and a fascinating story.
Thanks, Morgan. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this week's Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the conversation between Stephan Talty and True Spies producer Morgan Childs.
More debriefs are available exclusively to SPYSCAPE Plus subscribers. You'll also be able to access other premium series, like The Razumov Files, our ambitious retelling of Joseph Conrad's Under Western Eyes. And for true crime fans, there's The Great James Bond Car Robbery,
the story of the hunt for James Bond's most notorious set of wheels. Subscribers also get new episodes of True Spies early and ad-free. Subscribe to SPYSCAPE Plus at plus.spyscape.com. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you're enjoying this podcast, please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?
In the U.S., there's a break-in every 26 seconds. But when intruders step near, Simply Safe Home Security steps up.
Stop. This is Simply Safe. Police are on the way.
Using AI alerts, U.S.-based live agents help deter break-ins. Simply Safe, no long-term contracts. Save 50% on your new system with professional monitoring at simplysafe.com/Spotify or with promo code Spotify.
Outdoor deterrence requires a Simply Safe Active Guard outdoor protection plan starting at $49.99 a month. Visit simplysafe.com/licenses for alarm license information. Tennessee 2012.